The flag of the United States of America, with its bold stripes and stars, the American flag is not just a national emblem, but a cultural icon that evokes a sense of identity, pride and history. But what happens when this iconic symbol is seen through the eyes of an artist? How can the familiar stars and stripes be reimagined to reflect new perspectives and contemporary issues? In this podcast, we have a special guest who has done just that. Join Joey B and myself as we sit down with Matt Firth, a visionary artist who has taken on the challenge of reinterpreting the American flag. We delve into his creative processes, the inspiration behind his work, and what this reimagined flag represents in today's world. And before we dive right in, I had a lighting problem in the flag lair, probably cables chewed by bats, no doubt, just as we were about to record, so I'm in the dark for all of this episode. C'est la vie. Enjoy.
And we've got special guest. The artist Matt Firth has done an exhibition called A United State, and he's here with us to talk about that and much more. So, Matt, welcome.
Thank you very much. Nice to talk to you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. First of all, how are you? How is everything?
Very well. Yeah, it's a little cold and grey in Amsterdam. We just had the tail end of a storm pass through yesterday, but all the trees in my neighbourhood are standing, as is my house. So all is well.
Good. Excellent. But the reason we're here is to talk about your exhibition, A United State. Do you want to just give us a brief overview, a top-level view of what that is before we get into the detail?
Yeah, certainly. It's a collection of reimaginings of the American flag. I'm not American myself, but America is a country that I've had a long and complicated relationship with, shall we say. And each flag in the exhibition attempts to kind of slice off a little bit of some of the issues affecting America and its democracy and its civil liberties and all the challenges facing the country and many others at the moment. So it felt like a really good opportunity to talk about these issues in the run up to the US election and in the weeks afterwards. So yeah, there have been some interesting conversations around the work.
And with that, I think I'll just bring in Joey, who has a little bit closer to the American election than I am.
Right after the election is when I saw your post, and I was especially bitter and jaded and angry and depressed and any other bad feeling you can probably think of, since obviously I didn't vote for Donald Trump. But when I saw the collection of flag art that you had there, I knew I had to dive into it right away because it was going to hit home with me. And I can honestly say I'm not that much of an art connoisseur. I can appreciate something to a degree because I'm not an artist myself. This is the only time an art exhibition of any kind has ever hit home with me. So wow. Thank you for that. I suspect a lot of Americans probably feel the same.
Thank you, Joey. That's high praise indeed. Yeah. Like I said, the reactions I've had to the work have been great, actually. You know, I obviously want as many people as possible to see the work. It's very timely. My original plan was actually to launch the exhibition on election night, and I was going to do a live stream of the election. I'm kind of glad I decided not to do that in the end. I think it would have been a depressing evening for many of my friends, very few of whom are sort of Trump fans. So the exhibition actually ended up launching 2 weeks after the election, which I think was a good amount of time for people to process what had happened and kind of be ready to come out and talk about it again and kind of figure out a way forward, really. So in that respect, I think it meant that the exhibition could be a bit more positive, forward-facing kind of launch pad for people to think about the future in a more positive way, rather than oh, isn't everything going to hell kind of occasion, which it may well have been on election night. You know, some of that feeling might have been captured. So yeah, you know, I think it's kind of about the resilience of community and the power of individual action a little bit. And it's supposed to be thought-provoking and kind of get some conversation and some connections going between people. So yeah, it's already had that effect, which is great.
What I love about it is that each one of these flags is a graphic representation that's forcing us as Americans to look inward. because from, childhood on, it's drummed into us, American exceptionalism. We are the best in everything. We are the number one country in the world. You name it, America is at the heart of it. And I don't want to say it's brainwashing. I guess really it is, but we don't look at ourselves objectively. And I think with the emergence of Donald Trump back in 2016 and then his reelection, a lot of people have started to look at themselves, at this country. But oftentimes it's hard to do that because you don't necessarily have anything tangible that can help guide you. And that's where I think your flags are incredibly integral, because each one of them has, a topic, addresses a topic that we really need to take an honest assessment of ourselves as Americans with respect to each one of those.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. For the exhibition, I decided not to put explanations under each flag, with the idea being that people who saw it, the audience, could kind of bring their own opinions to it a little bit. And it was interesting how some people interpreted what I'd done and saw positive or negative things in both of them. I think America is a really complex country. We're dealing with people and emotions and history and biology, so it's not a black and white thing. And for me, what's so interesting about the American flag as a symbol is, I mean, it's probably one, if not the most recognized symbol in the world. It's so loaded with history. It means so many things to so many different people. When you think about, raising the flag over Iwo Jima or the flag on the moon, and just my experiences of traveling around America, how often you see the flag displayed in places. It's such a huge part of the culture, and it embodies like so many different parts of the national identity. It talks about kind of social, racial, economic, political forces, and embodies everything that kind of upholds its values, but also kind of challenges them as well. So it's a fascinating symbol to work with. And then also, like, from a design point of view, it really lends itself to like remixing and reinterpretation in a way that a lot of other flags kind of just don't really. It's very recognizable, and it has kind of like the right amount of elements. You have the star field, you have the stars themselves and the stripes. And so it lent itself very readily to all of these remixes. When I started the process, I never imagined I would create a series. I just created one, first of all, and then the others just started to come. I think as the run into the election unfolded and more issues were raised, it kind of triggered another thought and another idea. Um, and some were easier to kind of put into designs than others. I mean, I have more designs kind of half done, so maybe I'm not finished with the series yet. Maybe there's more to come. But yeah, it really lent itself to this kind of graphic exploration in a way that not many other flags would do, I think.
You actually answered a question I was going to ask. I was curious as to whether or not you were going to expand on your current portfolio of flags that you have, and it sounds like you do have some flags in the works. I'm curious as to see those when they come out. What was the first one that you did that inspired the entire thing?
So the first one I did is "Oh Say Can You See," and that is the flag that references the dazzle camouflage style that was used to create confusion around viewing ships around World War One. So if you imagine looking through a ship through a periscope, it would normally be quite easy to see the direction of travel of the ship and plot a path for a torpedo. But dazzle camouflage kind of doesn't attempt to hide an object. It creates confusion around its edges and its direction. And so I felt that that kind of mirrored what was going on with the way information was being spread and communicated in America. And things like social media and fake news were affecting, I think, democracy in the run into the election. And so that was the first one that was kind of created as a commentary there on what was going on in America. And I've always loved dazzle camouflage. I love the idea of not trying to hide something, but to sort of create confusion. And, it's very visually arresting. And I'm trying to get people to sort of look check themselves for bias and look at topics from different viewpoints and understand other people's viewpoints. And you can kind of see that going on in the flag a little bit as well. It's sort of a bit cubist. It's like looking at the flag from different directions at the same time. And yeah, it just felt like visually quite arresting. And so that was the first design that I did. And that was the only one that I actually had made into a flag proper. Which kind of hung sort of front and center at the far end of the hall of the exhibition as you came in. So I worked with a company in the UK called Flying Colours, who are fantastic flag makers, and it was a great experience working with them and seeing the flag at scale. So yeah, that was the one that started it all, really.
I must admit, from my side, I think the one that stood out, because obviously I was very fortunate to pass by the exhibition in Amsterdam. So when we actually met face to face, which was great. The one that stood out for me, but I'm only probably coming at this because of my simplistic, and as Joey knows, I like an unbusy design of flag. So your 51st state design was the one that stood out for me, but I think purely from a design perspective as opposed to anything that really sits behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note that my designs are conceived to be screen prints first of all, and flags kind of second. And so I would, yeah, readily admit that some of them do not work as flags. I think they're too detailed, and you need to get close and you need to see what's going on. But some of them absolutely work very well, like 51st State would be perfect as a flag. So perhaps that's why you were kind of more drawn to that one. And that's one that kind of reimagines, or it's kind of like an alternate reality, or perhaps even a looming future where perhaps America might have extended its territory once again. A lot of people talked about Puerto Rico when I explained the idea of this in the exhibition, but I suppose it kind of evokes a colonial past while maybe looking at the possibility of an expansionist future a little bit. So there's an added star there symbolizing the conquest and ambition and maybe of a new state being added to the Union. And then the inversion of the flag, well, I guess from a design point of view, it just seemed to work really well. From a layout point of view, in the having the 51 stars to work with rather than the 50. And yeah, that kind of inversion maybe suggested a little bit of a shift in values or priorities or that kind of alternate reality for me as well. But it's certainly one of the simpler designs that I could imagine flying from the top of a flagpole and still kind of being recognizable as the American flag, making people kind of stop and think a little bit.
Yeah. But just on the design though, did you have, because I know that there are some patriots who probably hate all of this because you're changing the design of the flag. Did you get any feedback from that side of the fence?
I was really braced for that to happen actually in the gallery, but I have not had any negative feedback in that
Wow.
respect at all. Yeah, people from both sides of the election in the US have really responded to the work very well, and people have seen different things in them. I mean, there's another one I did called Freedom of Speech, where the blue stars are replaced by kind of fists representing kind of protest culture, and the stripes are made with kind of truncheons and police batons. So yeah, somebody came to the gallery who was actually a very vocal Trump supporter, is a guy from Texas that came in and said, "Oh, is that Republicans versus Democrats?" Which I hadn't seen it as. And I said, "Oh, well, I guess a lot of people say Trump's not necessarily a very good listener, and the Democrats have vowed to kind of keep on fighting. So it's interesting that you see it like that." And that was a good example of, someone bringing something to the work that I hadn't really sort of, seen myself. Yeah, I think for me it was more about that balance between kind of free speech and state control and the rise of protest culture. Yeah, it's just really interesting to hear what other people bring to the work, really.
Was one of the three that I had written down that stood out for me as well. And I took from it the meaning that you just described that you had originally intended. So it is interesting for me that somebody else had a slightly different view that was, excuse me, more political to his point, Republicans versus Democrats. I didn't interpret it that way. Um, but that's one of the beautiful things about art is that it can be open to interpretation. However, our biases and our surroundings, dictate how we see things.
Yeah.
There was one where I did my interpretation different from yours. It was coming home, and I absolutely agree with what you're saying about the divide between rural and urban America. But what I took from it, at least before reading the description behind it, we are not a very walking friendly country. It is, unless you live in the heart of certain major metropolitan areas, you're not walking anywhere because you can't. You have to drive from point A to point B to point C. Even when I lived in downtown Los Angeles, I had to take public transportation or get someone to drive me. I didn't have a car at the time. You can't walk. And that is, I guess, by design with, the way we've planned out this country where we are slaves to fossil fuels and automobiles, and God forbid we have high speed rail and nice public transit that can get us from point A to point B. So for me it was America's addiction to driving.
Ah, interesting.
That's how it stood out.
Yeah. I think of all of the flag designs, that one maybe I felt was kind of one of the more soft emotionally. Expats living here in the Netherlands who saw that, I think that was the one that kind of made them kind of like miss home and want to go back again. But actually, perhaps they felt that the home they were missing was the place that they grew up.
Yeah.
It was quite a nostalgic experience for them looking at. And I guess it's also kind of about, yeah, so I totally agree with what you're saying. I think it's partly the geography and it's partly the planning or lack of it that's kind of made America so reliant on cars and highways. But I think some of the coming home flag was about capturing the tension between like the rural beginnings and roots of America and the urbanization of like big cities. People, if you ask someone what America looks like, I think most people who aren't American will think of like the New York skyline and skyscrapers and very urban environments. But of course, so much of the country doesn't look like that. And that's where the roots and the kind of heartland of the country are. So I wanted to kind of draw a connection and kind of capture some of the tension between those two kind of environments. And yeah, I guess that you could say that the road or the highway kind of symbolizes a bit of a journey back to your origins. So that's why it's called coming home, a longing for like this balance perhaps between progress and like, a simpler kind of like, yeah, more nostalgic way of life that perhaps you might have felt in your childhood. And I think so many people have like childhood memories of being in the back of the car while their parents are driving, going to see family or coming back home again. So yeah, that was a real emotional trigger for a lot of people, that one. It's also my 5-year-old son's favorite. I asked him what it was about and he said, "Oh, I think it's about bedtime because it has the little stars over the house in the
Yeah.
prayer." So yeah.
Your commentary on America's addiction to pharmaceuticals, Home of the Brave, that one is spot on, especially right now with everything that's happening with the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO and other pharmaceutical, or excuse me, other healthcare insurers, CEOs panicking and hiring bodyguards because of what's happening here with the
Mm.
state of our healthcare industry. That's one of the ones that hit home for me in particular because I have had a lot of struggles with health insurance here over the decades, and most Americans have. And I love that flag for that reason because you're calling it out.
That was an issue that I really felt like I wanted to address in one of the flags. I guess I'm trying to get a little bit of a duality in a lot of the flags. I don't want them to be all criticism. I
Sure.
think America is a leader in medical innovation. I
Mhm.
think it registers more medical patents per year by far than any other country in the world. And so it's leading the charge in caring for people. But then, of course, there's another side to that, that it's a nation burdened by addiction. There are high healthcare costs. You've kind of got synthetic drugs like fentanyl, and you've got this weight loss drug, Ozempic, that's sweeping the kind of celebrity nation. And yeah, it's a really, really complicated issue. As for me, and not being American and going to America, I'm always surprised by how aggressive pharmaceutical marketing is there.
Yes.
Um, and I guess it's a question about what the societal cost of widespread drug use is. There are challenges of access, dependency, long-term effects, medication pushed as quick fix solutions. It's really about that balance between progress and dependency. So, yeah, I know many Americans struggle to afford necessary medications. Like I say, there's prescription opioids that can be initially prescribed for pain management, but lead to addiction. It's a really challenging issue, and it's one that drew a lot of people in, and they kind of got it straight away from looking at the image as well. So
Because another one of mine that I appreciate and like is the slightly chaotic, but depending which side of the flag you're looking at, is your wild side style. See, I like that because left-hand side starts, especially with the red stripes, it's all very military and straights and everything, and obviously then the chaos exudes after that on the red stripes, and obviously in the canton as well. Can you just give me a bit more about the behind of that? Because I do love that flag.
yeah, certainly. Well, the title, first of all, I guess, is a reference to graffiti culture. So while I mean, graffiti is obviously a culture that originated in America, in and around New York, and wild style refers to kind of the emergence of arrows being used on interlocking letter forms. They made the text difficult to read, but they were included to kind of give letters energy and suggest movement and a bit more kind of dynamism. Um, and so it's a reference to that. Graffiti culture and street art has been a big part of my sort of artistic history and inspiration. But graffiti is kind of seen as a bit of a rebellious form of expression. It's about creative freedom and a bit about cultural resistance. And I suppose there's part of that going on when you're messing with someone's flag as well. But I guess more broadly, wild style could represent a bit more of a audacious, unconventional kind of approach to life and building a country and a society. It's about non-conformity, it's about resilience, and it's about kind of artistic defiance as well. But most people kind of looked at it and went, yeah, like our country's a little bit of a mess at the moment, isn't it? We're all pulling in separate directions. And so that was the immediate read in the context of the now, in the context of the US election. Again, because it's a blue and a red thing and the flag, you can kind of read it as two parties, which some people did. But yeah, I think primarily the most common read on it now was the kind of polarization of people and not everyone pulling in the same direction anymore, and kind of the fabric of society being a bit under stress and things being a little bit wild.
If I had to pick one of your flag images that to me is the most powerful, it would be Land of the Free, with the arms that are hanging out of the jail bars, that are the stripes of the flag. We have the highest, incarceration rate in the world, which is obscene in and of itself, but it disproportionately affects Black men. Private prison industry here is horrific. I mean, the stocks of a couple different private prison companies shot up after this latest election because of what they saw coming with the forced, detention and ultimately expulsion of Latinos, whether they're actually naturalized citizens or not.
Yeah.
I if you ask an American about, our prison system, you're going to have some people who say all cops suck. You're going to have some people who say cops can do no wrong. I don't subscribe to either one of those. Like in any profession, you've got people who do the right thing and you have people who abuse it. but there's a fundamental flaw in our justice system. And I suspect it's working the way it's been designed, which is not to the benefit of people of color. And this, I think, more than any other one for me, is where we as a country need to look inward and say, what the fuck are we doing? Pardon my language, but yeah, so that one, that's the home run for me.
I think, yeah, that was another one of the issues, along with the pharmaceutical theme that we talked about earlier, that I felt that I just had to touch on, really, because, as you say, there's such a high rate of incarceration there. And to me, the system doesn't seem to be designed for rehabilitation, for reintroducing people back into society as productive citizens. It actually seems like the aim is to keep them on a path of kind of, like a divided part of society, a second tier, where they're either become long-term prisoners. They're working while they're in prison for a very low wage as well, and there's a
Yep.
huge part of the US
Yeah.
workforce that comes from incarceration. Um, and it does connect in with drug problems as well. People are exposed to a lot of bad influences in prison, and so there has to be a better answer, really. From a design point of view, this was one of the trickiest ones to get right. A lot of the first versions that I did had the bars vertically, as you would normally see them. But there was something about it that just wasn't working. I mean, the hands coming through are blue, obviously, rather than black, but a lot of people read it straight away as a reference to, yeah, the imbalance in white versus black imprisonment that you mentioned earlier. But I think one of the things that I liked about keeping the stripes going horizontally was that it felt like this person was being imprisoned by the flag itself.
Mhm.
And I guess I wanted to get the point across that, many people in American society are being confined by the system that is supposed to be there to protect them. And so that's the duality that I kind of wanted to get across there, or the tension within the flag. And then having the stars as kind of like, some of them are very old school sheriff's badges, is up to kind of various forms of, like, yeah, police shields and stars and kind of things that you would see in various different styles across different states and different branches of law enforcement across America. So I was very pleased with the way that that all came together, and I think it does make a very powerful statement. Those hands coming through the stripes are not raised in defiance. They kind of look a little bit broken and defeated and sad. And I think ultimately that's kind of what incarceration does to most people. The rest of them, it makes them angry, but it doesn't make people into great citizens that go out and then do good things in society again.
We've talked about the three that really, like, the meaning behind them hit home for me. If I could look at another one where the graphic itself literally resonates, it's Suspicious Minds. We are a country of mass surveillance. You can't go anywhere without, a camera looking at you. People have cameras on the dashboard of their car. Every intersection has cameras. Every store has cameras. So you are constantly being observed, and there are certainly good things about that, but it can also make you paranoid. So I thought that was a very interesting and apt graphic that you had for that one.
It's good to live in a secure and a safe place, and sometimes cameras and the feeling you're being watched can be a big part of that. But the initial design for this actually had the eyes that replaced the stars in the star field looking in different directions, but then having them all in the same direction gives you, as the person stood in front of the work, that feeling of being watched a little bit more. But yeah, I think you're right. There is a lot more suspicion than there used to be. I think not just in America, but all over the world, there's this kind of culture of othering going on, where people are suspicious about people that they perceive to be different from
Yes.
them in some way. We're getting to a stage where people are building walls rather than bridges. People are starting to live in gated communities. People are moving away from each other to be closer to other people they perceive as being like them. So I think maybe we're losing our trust in each other a little bit, and perhaps we're losing a bit of faith in our future together. So yeah, of course, it evokes a bit of a sense of like surveillance and distrust. It's also obviously an Elvis reference. You can't have an exhibition about America without talking about Elvis, of course. And yeah, I'm a big Elvis fan, so it was nice to get that in there. And the lyrics to the track seemed kind of really apt as to what's going on at the moment. You know, we can't build our dreams on suspicious minds. Yeah, you know, America and a lot of places in the world feel like nations increasingly consumed by paranoia and division. I think a lot of people are frustrated. They feel a little bit powerless to act. And so there's a tension that's kind of represented by the jagged stripes in the flag there. And there's a loss of belonging, you know, like people are more vulnerable to like us versus them stories. I think social media is a lot of that. I think it tends to magnify more extreme voices, and it means that people's ideology becomes a big part of their identity now. So what you say and what you talk about online becomes kind of who you are to a lot of people. And yeah, we have this culture of othering and aversion, and you know, I worry about the threat it poses to kind of the fabric of society, really. So yeah, that's where the title came in. You know, we can't go on together with suspicious minds. We can't build our dreams on suspicious minds. We've got to try and figure out a way forward where we can build connections with each other rather than moving away from each other.
Now, we're seeing a lot of the othering that you mentioned near the tail end of this presidential campaign, when all over social media, people were accusing Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, of eating people's pets.
I
And
couldn't believe that story. Yeah.
I had a team meeting at work where two people on my team were talking about they're eating dogs up in Ohio. I said, nobody's eating dogs. Nobody's eating anybody's pets. This is all a bullshit story to get people spun up. And even after, you know, JD Vance admitted it was bullshit, they still consumed it and they still took it as truth. And you know, that's the quickest way to, you know, for the powers that be to assume control, is to, you know, pit us against one another, make somebody else the other, make
Yeah.
suspicious of something and someone that they don't understand, and it just spirals very quickly from there. And that's what we are seeing very, you know, very rapidly here.
Yeah, it's a divide and conquer tactic. I think that's becoming more commonplace, and we're seeing more and more in different ways. Um, yeah, I mean, you know, the name of my exhibition is a United State, and so it's a kind of a call to action to bring people together and to realize that what they have in common is far stronger than the things that make them different from each other. And ultimately, I think that's what a flag does. You know, it's a reminder that you have more in common with people. It's like a system that that says, you know, we all believe in the same thing here. And that's why a flag can be such a powerful tool for unifying people. But it's not that simple, is it? It means different things to different people, so it can be very divisive as well. That's what's so interesting for me about the American flag in particular.
Like after the election, I did a lot of soul searching about this country. I'm a military veteran. You know, I'm the son of a veteran, the descendant of many veterans, and the flag has always been something, you know, relatively sacred to me and my family. And then after this particular election, to me, it just became more like a piece of cloth. Like what I believed that the flag stood for was a lie. What
Yeah.
what I've always thought throughout history that this flag was supposed to represent are not actually American ideals. And I hope one day that changes. I don't know if it actually will. But when I say that the flags that you have in this exhibit speak to me more than the actual American flag, that's the case now, because I've had to re-examine a lot about America following this election. And it doesn't mean I don't love my country. I do. And I want it to be better. I want it to be what the American flag is supposed to represent. But to me, what it represents right now is not, it's nothing that I would want to be a part of. It's nothing that I fought for. That's my take on the flag. I know a lot of people who feel the same. I know a lot of people who feel the opposite and would probably, you know, throw tomatoes at me or something for saying that. So
Yeah.
to your point, it means different things to different people. And it's not quite as unifying as it once was after 9/11, as an example. I mean, it popped up all over the place. I mean, people always had American flags, but you started seeing it on college sports uniforms. You still do to this day, on football helmets, on
Yeah.
basketball jerseys. You're not patriotic if you don't have American flag lapel pin, which, popped up after 9/11 for every member of Congress. So it's interesting how it's evolved since that day, and how it's perceived depending upon what your status in our society is.
Yeah, well, it would be interesting to see what happens on Inauguration Day, I think is Jan 20th.
Yes.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the run up to that, and of course in the weeks and months and years after that, to see what happens. And I think some things are going to occur that are going to raise some of the issues that I'm talking about with some of my flags. Unfortunately, perhaps not always in a positive way. But yeah, I think it's important that we keep talking about these issues and we keep trying to connect about it. And I was certainly very keen to talk to people with very differing views from my own, because on social media it's very difficult to do that. It can be a bit of a echo chamber. Of course, you're more likely to connect with people whose opinions match yours. And that was the same with a lot of people who came to the opening night of the gallery. But it was great, the one or two people that did come in that had differing opinions to mine, to have great conversations with them. So, yeah, my hope is to try and reach more of those people and have those conversations and try and connect them with differing points of view, to maybe realize that perhaps we're not all as different as we think we are, and the world doesn't need to be so divided. And ultimately, the United States, it's a symbol of unification. It's a symbol of belief in an ideology and ideals that should bind people together, not divide them apart. So here's hoping that things can go in a better direction for the next few years. Is one of the other flags in the exhibition, reservations, is a kind of a commentary on like coexistence versus division. Yeah, of course, like America is always talked about as this big cultural melting pot, and I agree with you that that's a large part of its success. I think when you get a lot of different kind of viewpoints coming together, I think you can get further faster. People bring different ideas to the table, and a more inclusive society is generally a better one. But yeah, the flag reservations is kind of a commentary on, I think, that division and versus coexistence that still exists in America today. It does question that narrative of the cultural melting pot a little bit. I think there are definitely tensions between kind of different alleged, kind of perceived groups in society. I mentioned earlier that people are kind of living in gated communities, and reservations kind of goes back to the very origins of the country, and the Native American population that now live in very small reservations. And then the stripes are formed by kind of more modern day suburban reservations, like, yeah. And those two things aren't necessarily mixed together. I guess when I first went to New York, which is always kind of talked about as a big cultural melting pot, but there's still kind of like a Chinatown, a little Italy, a little Russia, and all of these pockets where communities of people naturally kind of graduate to other people that are like them, which is, something that people do all over the world. They want familiarity and they want kind of comfort and coexistence with people that know and understand them. So yeah, I think it's an important issue to comment on, and I guess I wanted to try and get people to confront their own biases and maybe consider what their own reservations are about reaching out to those they perceive as different to themselves.
It's a fantastic exhibition, Matt,
I love
and thank you for sharing your thoughts and ideas behind all of it. And as you say, different people have different viewpoints to the same thing, which I think is great. And I think the overarching piece of this is the clues in the name of the country, United. So, and it's missing a big part of that, mind you. We have that in the UK as well, and we seem to be missing that. But anyway, let's not go down that route. That's a whole different ball game as well. Just before we sign off and close this down, just one thing from me, but to Joey, did you want to quickly, in a minute, explain your backdrop of flags?
Oh, sure. So I wanted to have flags behind me that were in the Stars and Stripes design pattern, but not the American flag, because your flags needed to be the focus of the discussion today. So I happen to have 4 national flags: Uruguay, Liberia, Togo, and Greece, that are in that Stars and Stripes style, but are not the American flag. So that's why I've got this particular backdrop behind me.
And it's a fantastic display, even though you do have that blessed sun with its face again. But anyway, that's...
Are you not a fan of that? Is that a bit too much detail for you?
Just a little bit creepy, and yeah, a little bit too much detail in my life.
Yeah.
He fears the son of May from Argentina's flag more than anything else.
Is it on the it's on the Uruguayan flag and the Argentinian flag as well, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. It beams there with a knowing smile that it's better than you, and I don't like it.
Bit condescending.
Yeah.
Well, I must confess, Tareth, I didn't realize we were going to actually be chatting for the podcast today, so I would have put my flag behind me, actually, which would have looked really nice. The only flag I have to hand is actually this beautiful one here. It's a little bit smaller than you guys' flags, but I'm half Welsh, and this one was given to me by my grandmother a long time ago. So that's a precious artifact of mine, and another favorite with my son, because it's got a dragon on it, that's pretty cool for a flag, I think.
That is where my dad's side of the family, I was able to trace back to Wales in 1600. So go Wales.
Well, Matt, it's been a pleasure talking to you and getting, as I say, a deeper, better understanding of your exhibition. And it was great meeting you that time back in back in Amsterdam, of course, obviously. So before we sign off, where can people find more details about A United State, your gallery?
They can go and visit my website, which is mattfirth.art, and you can find out about the exhibition there. You can see all of the flag designs, and you can even buy yourself a beautiful screen print to hang on your wall at home if you wish to. And then, I'm looking to take the show on the road. As I mentioned to you at the start of our conversation, I'm hoping to bring the exhibition to America. So if there's anyone out there that's got a space that they would be willing to host the exhibition in, then please get in touch.
Well, you heard it here first. Then. Brilliant. Well, all the best, Matt, going forward with that.
Thank you.
We'll be watching and seeing how that progresses and see how the USA takes this by storm, I wonder. So thanks very much from me.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Like I said, your exhibit is fascinating, and it's the only art exhibit that I've ever taken a genuine interest in.
It's been great talking to you.